this how your mom would do it when you were growing up as a child?
My mom used ragu traditional.
Yeah.
So this is a great dish for the weeknight because it's not a traditional 8-hour cooking bolognese. I can cook it in like 30 to 45 minutes. It's bright from the tomatoes. There's a little bit of sweetness that the sugar enhances. Really comforting. It's honestly like a hug in a bowl. Hello, my name's Tracy. I'm the chef and co-owner of Birdie's in Austin, Texas. Today we're making my favorite dish of all time, spaghetti bolognese. Growing up in Texas, my mom used to make this for me all the time. I love eating it because I feel like a kid. And now my husband and business partner, Arjav, requests it regularly. So for this dish, you're gonna head to the store, get some ground beef, ground pork, San Marzano tomatoes, of course spaghetti, red wine, olive oil, celery, carrots, garlic and onions, Parmesan cheese, red wine vinegar, butter, heavy cream, sugar, tomato paste, and parsley. So first thing, we bring water to a boil. I have about 4 quarts here. I like cooking my pasta in a large pot. It doesn't need to be insanely huge. Bring the water up to a boil first, then add the salt. That way you ensure it dissolves. While the pasta water is coming up to a boil, we can start cutting our vegetables. I like to cut my vegetables pretty small. That way it cooks evenly. Cut it into these thin strips. I cut my vegetables around 1/8 of an inch-ish, as long as it's small and they're all about the same size. This is a pretty rustic dish. Now we're gonna peel some carrots and then cut them in the same small size. I'm going for about 1/2 cup here. Just like the celery, once I get these in little julienne strips, I'll run my knife back through pretty quick into nice small pieces like the celery. Next up, I'm going to peel around 6 or 8 cloves of garlic. I'm just gonna break them apart and just give it a quick smash. You can use the back of your knife or the heel of your hand. I also like to cut off the little end of garlic. After I smash it and cut off the end, I like to use a paring knife to peel it. That kind of pops them out of their shell. I can go pretty quick. Now we're gonna rough chop garlic. You can just run your knife through it a few times. I like this dish to be garlicky without being a total garlic bomb. If you really, really love garlic, you can make it rain and add more, but 6 to 8 seems to be the right amount for me. So I'm just giving this a really quick chop. I don't want any huge garlic chunks. I'm gonna keep the garlic separate from the other vegetables. I don't want it to burn, so what I'm going to do is cook the mirepoix, get that nice and soft, and then add the garlic towards the end. And there we go, rough chopped garlic. Next up, we're going to chop an onion. For this recipe, we need around 1 cup. It's about 1/2 an onion. I also like to use a paring knife to peel onions. When they're really fresh, the peel sticks really tightly to the onion, which is great. It just takes a little longer to peel. So I'm just going to finely chop this onion around the same size that I cut the celery and the carrot. I like to go sideways first, then up top, and then come back over top, and then cut it into pieces. And whenever you're working with onions, just like anything, use a sharp knife to avoid all the tears. Next up, I'm going to hand crush our San Marzano tomatoes. I like doing it with my hands versus just in a pot with a spoon because I feel like I can get them in little smaller pieces. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's kind of a grandma style dish. I think it's really grandma style to have a few chunks in it, which I don't mind. I just don't want large whole tomatoes in my bolognese. Next up, I'm going to pick some parsley. I like to use flat leaf parsley versus the curly leaf. I feel like the flavor's better, and I just feel like I'm in an 80s steakhouse with the curly parsley. I don't know, was that too much? I'm just picking the parsley off the stems. You just don't want the coarse, thick stem at the bottom. The stems are actually really delicious sliced thin. Once the parsley's picked, I just like to run my knife through. I stack it a little bit to make it easier. It's kind of a rough chiffonade. It doesn't need to be super fine, just small enough that it's integrated. I run my knife back through sideways and then a couple times through, and that's it. The hardest part's out of the way. I like using in my bolognese 3/4 pound ground beef, 1/4 pound pork. The pork really gives it some richness. There's typically more fat in it, and you also get that porky flavor, which I love. However, if you don't like pork, you can just substitute it with ground beef. I'm going to move all of my ingredients over here so we can start cooking. I just drizzle the pot with some olive oil. Don't be shy. You really want to have enough fat so you can cook out the mirepoix. I put it on medium-high heat, give that a few seconds. Once that gets nice and hot, I'm going to add the vegetables. I like to start seasoning with salt and pepper. I always season throughout. The final dish is always better that way. There's a couple small exceptions to that, but in general, you really want the salt to pull out all of that flavor from the vegetables. I'm sweating out the Mirepoix around 8 minutes-ish. The main thing isn't the time. Everyone's burner at home is different. The main thing is that the vegetables are cooked through. In Bologna, when they make bolognese, they cook it slow and low for like 8 hours. And this is definitely an Italian-American weeknight version where you can cook it really quickly. My mom grew up cooking it for me, and it was always on the table in like 30 minutes. After around 8 minutes, I'll start tasting it just to make sure the vegetables are fully cooked and tender, super soft. So now I'm going to add my chopped garlic. I just cooked this out for 2 or 3 minutes, so it's cooked through. So now that it's been a few minutes with the garlic, I'm gonna give it a quick taste, make sure the garlic's cooked. Now I'm going to add my beef and pork. I keep this now around medium heat while I'm starting to cook the meat. I like to press it down a little bit, can give it a little bit of color and allow it to evenly cook. This will take around 3 to 6 minutes, depending on your stove. You're really looking for the meat to be mostly cooked. We're still adding a bunch of stuff to the pot, so it's gonna continue to carry over cook, and you don't want your meat totally hammered. So while that meat's cooking, I'm going to season it with salt and black pepper. So now I'm going to keep stirring the meat. Also, as I'm stirring the beef and the pork, I'm sure to smash it up in pieces so I don't have big chunks in my bolognese. Now that my ground meat's almost cooked, I'm going to add tomato paste and sugar. I like to add sugar whenever I caramelize tomato paste because the sugar really helps get the tomato paste going and gives it kind of a deep earthy red, which really gives it more of a robust flavor. It's been a few minutes frying the tomato paste. Letting it go for those few minutes adds another dimension of tomato flavor that you don't just get from the tomatoes. So now I'm going to add some red wine. A little for me, and a little for the bolognese. Yum. So now I'm going to reduce the red wine. I'm really looking to cook off the alcohol, so I want to make sure I cook it all the way down, or as chefs say, bring it down to sec. Be sure to cook off all of the red wine. If you don't cook it all the way down, it's gonna taste like a little bit of red winey flavor and not in a good way. Then I'm going to add my crushed tomatoes. The original version doesn't contain much tomato other than tomato paste. I'm going to cook out the tomatoes for around 5 minutes or so. Now's the perfect time to drop my pasta. We're using spaghetti today. In Bologna, they would use tagliatelle. And then I like to cook it to al dente, so check the box it comes in. I let it go for about a minute, and I'll just give that a nice stir so I don't get any clumps of spaghetti. After the tomato's been cooking around 5 minutes, I'm going to add the heavy cream. I'll give that a stir. So now that the cream is cooked out for a few minutes, I'm going to add the butter. You just want to melt the butter here. You're not looking to really cook it out. I like to add it at the very end. It gives it a little bit of richness to the pasta and balances out all of the acidity from the tomatoes. I typically cook my pasta a minute less than the instructions indicate and finish cooking it in the sauce. I'm gonna give it a quick check. Try not to burn myself. Has a little bit of chew. That's great. And I'm gonna carefully transfer the pot of pasta with the pasta insert into the bolognese. Once I add my spaghetti to the pot of bolognese, I'm gonna keep cooking it until the sauce hugs the noodles. If the sauce looks a little too wet, I can just add some more time onto the recipe. If it looks a little dry, I can add some of the reserved pasta water. I'm going to add a tiny bit of red wine vinegar, just for a little acidity. Then I'm gonna turn off my heat. I'm going to add half of my parsley and give it a stir so it's all evenly distributed throughout. And last thing before I serve, I'm just gonna give it a quick taste to make sure my seasoning's on point. This is always a little messy. Delicious. Now the pasta looks and tastes great. We're ready to plate it up. So now I'm going to individually plate it. I like to give it a little twist so it stays in one place. I don't mind a little rustic. Now I'm going to top with my Parmesan cheese. I like to leave the cheese on the table so everyone can grate their own. And then I finish with a little bit more parsley. Now I'm excited to try. Need to check to see if it's just like mom's. I'm a big twirler of my spaghetti. So this really brings me back to my childhood. You get the acidity from the tomatoes, the sweetness from the fried tomato paste, some richness from the pork, some herbal notes from the parsley. This is just my favorite bowl of comforting pasta. Even though this isn't a traditional bolognese, it's an Italian-American favorite that I love and that I grew up eating. So thanks for letting me share it with you. If you're ever in Austin, please stop by Birdie's and say hi. We always have a couple of homemade pastas on the menu. It's changing every day, so please stop in. Thanks again for watching.